Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I must say that over the last few weeks, I've had the pleasure of reading Alberto Ruy Sanchez's work, and it's been both a pleasure and a challenge, which is what I believe all literature must do. So here's just an introduction. Some rather strange things are said about Alberto Ruy Sanchez. That he came to Mogador from an eastern Mexican desert and has never left because he discovered that there is a bit of that city everywhere. He believes that it is a dimension of human existence in which unbridled desire abides. He believes that Mogador resides in the body and that on clear days it is possible to glimpse its presence on the skin, especially on the skin of readers of this book and the others that comprise the quintet of Mogador. The Names of the Air received in 1998 the distinguished Mexican Literary Prize, Premio Javier Villarrutia. With this book, the author began the poetic exploration of desire in narrative form, which received the prestigious Prix des Trois Continents for its French edition, and recipient of the Premio Calamo in Spain. The Hand of Fire and Poetics of Wonder. His work as a narrator, poet, and essayist include more than 20 titles, including The Demons of the Tongue, what a great title, With Literature in the Body, In Praise of Insomnia, and an introduction to Octavio Paz. His work has been translated into more than 20 languages and supported and recognized by the Guggenheim Foundation, the University of Louisville, and Alberto was bestowed the title of Officer of the Order of Arts and Letters by the French government. So I could go on, but here's what Octavio Paz has to say. Ruy Sanchez's works of fiction are always amazing. Adventure, poetry, and intelligence in a new geometry of words. His writing has nerve and agility. His intelligence is sharp without being cruel. His mood is sympathetic without complicity. And finally, I had the pleasure of chatting with Alberto's translator, Rhonda Dahl Buchanan, who has played such an important role in bringing his work to Western readers. And she believes that for Alberto Ruy Sanchez, words are things of substance that have a life of their own, highly charged missiles capable of detonating desire when they are released. Please welcome Alberto Ruy Sanchez. Alberto, I do hope that through our conversation we are able to present to our audience today the complexity and uniqueness of your words. But let me get back to what Rhonda Buchanan said about words being missiles for you. The playwright Harold Pinter said that for him words were weapons. So what do words mean to you?
Well, not weapons. But first let me use the word thank you, because I'm really flattered, but mainly intimidated by all the research and the work you did on the books. Thank you so much, really.
It's been my pleasure.
It's really a lot. I appreciate it.
Thank
and
you.
I want to thank also the festival for inviting me here. After being in Jaipur, being here is an echo of the happiness I had there. So it's already propitious. Thank you so much. And I want to thank Anne Wallman also, not only for being here, but for making me come here, for our friendship of so many years, and also because it's another echo, because when you invited me to teach in Europa, it was also a shining moment of my life, to meeting all those interesting students and all the interesting faculty around and all the happenings that you may exist out there are really a lesson in life. Thank you so much, Anne. And well, about well, I don't know, but you know, when you write, people make of your words what they want. I always appreciate that people make whatever they want with my words. So if for someone works as weapons, I understand it in a very cultural way. It's weapons that detonate other things, echoes of what people wants to be. One of the strangest things that detonated my books, and one of the ones I love the most, has nothing to do with me. I don't have any merit of it. Is this phenomenon that happened that when one of my characters in the second book is a calligrapher, so he writes with Arabic calligraphies, and once the book was published, I began to receive photographs of many women, a few men also, who took the words of my book converted into designs to make tattoos. So there is like a whole edition of my words in the skin of readers.
Wow.
And, you know, an author cannot planify that.
Yes. So
I always, when they send me the photos, some of the photos are in parts that you cannot publish if you don't have permission. So I ask permission, and mainly I ask to tell them why they do that. And to my astonishment, each one has a different story.
Wow.
I like it very much because there is, of course, a kind of making a statement of their independence, their complicity with someone, their history. Sometimes to remember a son who died, sometimes is to make a compliment with a lover. There was a couple of lovers, two women who made each one of them half of the calligraphy in the body. So when they are together, the calligraphy becomes complete and the word is spelled. Wow. So you see, I always say that the writer ritually, and we saw how Anne does it, the incantatory qualities of the words. Writing for me is a ritual too. Mm-hmm. And the writer invokes the fire, but only the reader makes it work, it's l'allume, lo enciende, turn it on.
Right.
So the writer can make the invocation of the fire, but only the reader can
bring it
really
to life,
make it be alive as a fire.
I love what you said, and I love the idea of two lovers being joined together by each half. And it reminds me of the Arabic word al-jabr, which is the word for algebra, which is actually reunion of the broken parts. And in a way, that is exactly what you've described, that not that the lovers are broken, but they can be. And in a way, the words are sort of reuniting them. So that's wonderful.
Yes, in Ibn Arabi, which utilizes it, there is the term of geometry of love.
Yes, and geometry plays a very important part in your writing, which is not necessarily something that I see in the work of any other author, really. Can you talk about that?
Yes. The first time I learned how to do it, it was from Beckett, from Samuel Beckett.
Okay.
Because in his plays, there is always a geometry.
Yes.
When the characters move, when they don't move, there is a geometry of what they are saying. And also in his novels are absolutely geometrical. Mm-hmm. So I try to learn from him, but also I try to learn from another geometry that comes from the Mexican crafts. You know that the tissues that some populations, some Indian populations make in Mexico, they are highly sophisticated, many times much more sophisticated technically than the literary most sophisticated works. And for the first book, the one that you wanted to comment mainly, the names of the air. I try to think on these skirts made in Mexico that are really, they are weaved in a way that there is not a beginning of the tissue. So everything is made like a tube already.
Right.
And on different days, they wear one part of the skirt at the front. So when you get to the round circle of the skirt, the beginning is anywhere and it's everywhere. So that to happen, you have to really be in a Baroque culture. Mm-hmm. Baroque for us means not as in the Protestant world, Baroque is something that is too charged, too complex. No. For us, Baroque is a project of civilization that was failed when the modern Protestant reform won all the field. To put it simply, to go to the narrative terms, in Protestant terms, things are or are not.
Right.
In Baroque terms, and we all know that in Mexico very well, things are and are not at the same time. So, applied to this, I wanted to begin a book in a place where it's not the beginning. But the whole book, when you go to the second chapter, you can begin by the second chapter and go around. And you can begin by the final chapter or the middle of the chapter. And to do that, I was trying to apply what the weavers do. Right. And is this complexity of having a double thread, not a plot.
Right.
And one of the things that I liked very much when the book was published in Japan, that for Japanese critics, it was an actualization and putting on scene of the polemics between Tanizaki, Hayuichiro Tanizaki, who was for plot, and Akutagawa, who was for a non-plot literature. Right. A literature that is more on the poetics of each fragment, the poetic substance and the poetic charge of what happens, and also relativity. So in Akutagawa, there is divisions of all the characters. Nothing is true and everything's true. Right. So I was very happy that it was read in those terms, because it's very much what I try to do.
And you're right, Tanizaki does, I mean, he writes about desire and obsession, but he is more structured in that sense, and he does follow plot. His work does have an engine, for sure. Before we get into the Names of the Air, which was the first book that you wrote, I was wondering if you could talk about the visit to the desert that you went with your father, I think when you were 5 years old, and what impact that had on you.
Well, I come from the north. Well, I was born in Mexico City, which is not the north, but all my family come from the north, my father, my mother, and as an emigrated family from the north, which is the desert part of Mexico, I lived eating the food of the north. I lived with all the values, and mainly I had this quality of the family reunions that conducted me towards literature, because when I wanted to be a writer, it was not to have my name on the printed books at the beginning. It was the pleasure of sharing stories, of telling and hearing stories, because that's what happened in the family reunions. Right. Because I come from a family that talks too much. and we do, as an immigrated family, we did a lot of weekends together, we made campings. So, and you know, in families there is fights, there is brothers and sisters that have fights, cousins, but we had rituals to recompose the family tissue everywhere. For example, we went to the camping on the Holy Week, and immediately after, we had the forgiveness dinner, we call it. And there, well, we don't ask for forgiveness. We are not Protestant in that way. We tell stories. And we all know the end of the story. That was why maybe I don't like the novels and the literature with suspense. Mm-hmm. I don't care who is the murderer. Yeah. When I begin to read, I imagine 12 murders, and you know, it's like chess playing. You imagine easily. What I like is the way every one of the persons saw the thing. And that is always different and unexpected. So for me, that was what happened. And there is another big pleasure that you can have on those very ancient reunions about telling stories, is that you forget things. Mm-hmm. Forgetting could be wonderful. Maybe, well, forget helps to live with painful things, but mainly I say it in the sense that if you remember, it is like the first time. Also because remember is reinventing things. So when I was like 5 years old, my family, my father, my strict small family, my mother, my father, my brother and me, we went to live into the desert of Baja California. And we arrived in a time when there was a rain that didn't happen before for 12 years. So it was really something that transformed the landscape. Everything was full of flowers. And those flowers lasted like 2 hours. So I saw that when I was 5 years old, and I forgot it completely. And 15 years later, when I went to Morocco, and I went to the Sahara, in a little place called Sagora, which now is not, they transformed it with a lot of palm trees, but at the time it was really like an oasis. And the same thing happened. There was a rain, and the landscape was transformed. And in that moment, I began to remember that other experience with my parent. And I thought that I was hallucinating. I didn't smoke anything at the moment. But I was really, it was like a delirium. So I wrote to my father, and he told me, yes, that happened and everything. So for me, going to Morocco was a way of recovering a part of me that I didn't know that was lost.
And would you say that it triggered something in your body in a way? Has that any connection with you when you were a child?
I have a dry skin. I need to sweat a lot.
I can completely understand what you're saying about when you say, my family, they talk a lot. My family drinks a lot. So I totally understand.
Sometimes comes together,
yes,
sometimes
it's very important. So storytelling and alcohol sometimes have a lot to do with each other. And later on, this was probably in 1975 that you visited Mogador for the first time. Yeah. And I'd just like you to talk about that visit, because that seems to have been one of the most important things that happened to you, just not just as a writer, but also as a human being.
Well, it's really a very, very long story. I try to make it
but
short. I expended many years telling that.
Yeah.
But, I was a student in Paris. And as a happy, poor student, I was incredibly happy. And I was living with a woman for the first time. And one of the things that I discovered that happened in Paris is linked to the fact that I'm a Mexican, well, badly educated in the machismo manners. So I didn't understood completely what happened in my woman's mind. I didn't understand her desires completely. I wanted to understand. That was one thing happening. The other thing is that I wanted to acquire my own voice as a writer. And the thing that happened outside that pushed us to Morocco is that in Paris, I don't know if you live there, there is really a horrible thing happening for tropical people like me. They call it winter. And it's something that happened in the heart of people. It's not only that it's cold outside. The smile, the spring smile becomes more horizontal and then climbs down completely as winter falls down. And if you ask something, they rah. And it's an ethnographical condition of French people. They are like that. It's nothing personal. But, of course, knowing that the sun doesn't come out in 8 months, the first time we discovered that the French invented a touristic technology that they called traveling on fourth class was made for the Moroccan workers returning with their economies to Morocco in the basement of a ship that you took in Set. Set is literary, is a charge port, because Set is where the Paul Valéry's poem happened. Les cimetières marins, how do you say, the sea, the graveyard by the sea. Do you translate it like that? And so it's a really wonderful port. So we went there and we got into this Moroccan ship. And in the basement, we were very happy with a lot of, the basement was like a movie theater in this yacht and was under the level of the cars. And we were there very happy until 2 hours later, there was really a storm beginning to happen. And the travel lasts 38 hours from Set to Tangiers. And something, I don't know, maybe all of us saw storms, a ship in the storm, and you know that it moves a lot as well. It's not like that. It's more like a car crash. So if you are in the basement, the ship crashes with the waves every half a minute, every 10 seconds. Fab, fab. And you know, at the time, there was no security bells in this movie room. So we were like, wham, everywhere. And it was really, nothing stayed inside the body. Not even the pills they gave you against the storm sicknesses. And you cannot sleep. You vanish. When we woke up, we were, of course, on the ground, and we heard the sounds of the first class. Thank you for traveling with us. Now first class will go down in, they went off. Second class, we heard nothing because they left with first class. Third class, and then fourth class, and no one moved. And all the Moroccans who were with us were at the bottom of the room. We saw them, and we got closer to see what was happening. Maybe a fight, maybe instructions to disembarkment, I don't know. And there was a storyteller from the square of Marrakesh, Shma el-Fna. This square is the first site that was considered by the UNESCO Patrimony of Humanity, and that was not stones. They call it now intangible, which is equally wrong, but at the time it was called oral Patrimony of Humanity. And it was done thanks to Juan Goytisolo, a Spanish writer who lives in that square, and he's a wonderful writer. I adore him. He passed away a few months ago. And this man was there, having the attention. You know, the storm was horrible. Everybody was, if they were normals, they would be running out of the ship. But no one of that circle got away because of the storyteller. So what story was he telling? He was telling the story of all of us being there the last night.
Oh, wow. And
I noticed that he was using a classic of literature, Das Narrenschiff, The Ship of Fools, by Sebastian Brandt. Is a 17th century classic in which each chapter is dedicated to a character, what they call characters. And of course, he was not pedantic. He was not saying, I will use a classic. No, he was using it. So I understood a sense of a classic. It has nothing to do with Harold Bloom. A classic is a book, at least in that moment, that help us to give a momentary order to the chaos of life, of the chaos we are living. And the chaos we had in the storm the last night was amazing. I couldn't imagine how to order a way of telling it. And the man was already making the telling of what we were living. And he was telling about, you know, the mother who was worried about their children, and he had one child, but he had two children, and he tied a child, and the child was going around. She was fat, so the child was like a moon going around the woman. He was telling about, you know, the different Muslims. There was two sects. And one decided that the Mecca was in that direction, and they were, of course, what do you do when there is a storm and you're in danger? You pray. So they were praying, and the others decided that the Mecca was in other direction. And so like 5 minutes after, they were fighting about the direction of the Mecca. And he was also telling stories about the Mexicans that were there surely by mistake. Wow. And they were so timid and that they were afraid to vomit. Nobody was afraid to vomit, but we were like...
So we I've never heard anyone say that line before.
So there, I have the first lesson of that trip. That was the lesson that made me remember that storytelling was what I wanted from literature. That was like the first lesson to my research, the research of my own voice. And from there, everything that happened became something that was talking in another language, the language of what I wanted to learn, and I didn't know that I would learn that. Right. I think that there was not only the intellectual operation of this lesson, it was also the sensitivity. We were so shocked that you were really like hallucinating the whole trip. And with the aid of whatever was happening, we kept hallucinating answers to all my questions. Wow. And I tell you briefly for example, the first time I got into a hammam, it was in the city of Fez. And the hammam, the steam bath, is the mornings is for the women and the evenings is for the men. And the architecture of the hammam was a very ancient one. So you get to the first room and you undress. But the tiles in the ceiling are, all the ceiling was made of not tiles, but glass, colored glass. So even if you get naked, you are dressed by the light and the colors of the light. So I discovered, well, that was a poem, but I didn't write it. Not even the architect. It was the act of getting there that makes you actually live a poem. The poem, you get dressed, but the light dresses you. Wow. And so I got to the first room, which was warm, and then to the second one, and then it was warmer each time. And there was not a sign saying follow. There was on each room four doors, and there was not a sign saying follow this direction. You follow them by the light and the temperature. If you were you had already too much, you took a door that took you to the main yard and you relax, or if you wanted warmer, you get into that direction. So I decided I want to write a book that is like that. Mm-hmm. A book in which suspense, who's the killer, doesn't matter, but a book that creates ambience, that creates spaces. The creation of spaces as the purpose of writing. And also, that means that you should write something that appeals to all the senses, not only to the meaning of a plot of a story. Mm-hmm. There should be a thread, but at the same time, there should be sensations. Not only the music of the words, but the taste of the words and the smell of the words, and everything comes through what you are building. Right. And also, it implies that if you feel bad or not comfortable, you get out. And you, as a writer, you need to accept that you are not kidnapping the attention of the people. Doesn't matter. It's for them to continue or not. And you have to refuse any appeal to chantage, any appeal to kidnapping the attention as you learn to do when you are a writer.
I think that's wonderful, and it reminds me of when I was talking to Rhonda, she said, ask Alberto what he means when he said, I want to boycott the orgasm. You know, and it reminded me of that in fiction, everyone teaches, or everyone talks about this sense of rising action, that there's a beginning, there's an inciting incident, you rise, there's a climax, and your work just doesn't accept any of that. And I love the idea of being able to not so much escape, but being able to sort of move into other areas of reflection. You know, when you spoke about fiction bringing sort of order to the chaos, it again reminded me of what Milan Kundera said, that I want my novels to be meditations. and in a way your work is that. I'd like to just request you to read from the Poetics of Wonder, Passage to Mogador. So I'd love for people to hear you read in Spanish.
I have it here. I'm not tweeting. Oh, do you prefer that one? Okay.
Yeah, the one, the burning words for lovers.
Okay.
Or you can read whichever one you have.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
It comes from the introduction to the whole quintet. The situation is that the two lovers, of course, it's a book that I wrote at the end. That's because it's introduction. The two lovers are so not tired, but they made love so much that their mouths are hurt. So the words have another taste and another meaning. And she's from Mogador, he's not. So they begin to explore words as tiles, aceite. There's many dimensions in all this search, but there's a dimension of all the Arabic words that we have in Spanish. More than 4,000 words in Spanish come from Arabic. And for example, and they are alive in Mexico much more than in Spain. For example, in Spain, they ate olives. They have olive oil. We call it, and they have the olive fruits, the olives. We call it aceitunas, not olives. And aceite, which is the word we use for oil, in Arabic is aceit. So there is 4,000 words that comes directly from Arabic. And so they are exploring words, and they arrive to the word Mogador, and then she explains him something. But this is the first page. I don't know how many of you understand Spanish, so it's maybe only for the music. No one? No.
Well, I heard Alberto read in Spanish, and I don't speak Spanish, but I was so enthralled. And also the rhythm of it is so important for us to get. And after he reads, I'll ruin the effect that he creates by reading in English for you, so don't worry.
Well, I read a paragraph. Llegó ese momento en que los amantes tienen ya los labios adoloridos de comerse uno al otro. Y hasta el viento que los toca enciende de nuevo sus sensaciones. A esa hora, más que a ninguna, las palabras pueden ser bravos detonantes, y en apariencia, desde la nada, desde el aire que cabe en sus vocales, pueden avivar una y otra vez el fuego de la sangre. Porque los amantes son frágiles como papel ante el roce ardiente de ciertas palabras. Los amantes se miran con los dedos, pero se dibujan y se tocan con la boca. Los amantes se escuchan incluso a través de sus silencios. Los amantes se describen, se reinventan, acuñan términos que en sus labios lucen nuevos. La palabra de un amante es una cosa, un objeto de aire que de pronto se aviva y late a la temperatura y al ritmo del cuerpo. Thank you.
Burning words for lovers. That moment had arrived when the lips of lovers ache from devouring each other, and even the touch of the wind reignites their senses. At that hour, more than any other, words may be volatile sparks that, out of nowhere, perhaps from the air filling each vowel, rekindle the fire in their blood time and time again. For lovers are as fragile as paper to the ardent caress of certain words. Lovers gaze at each other with their fingers, but trace and touch one another with their mouths. Lovers listen to each other even in their silence. Lovers describe and reinvent one another, coining phrases that shine like new as they cross their lips. The words of lovers are things, ethereal objects that suddenly flare and beat to the temperature and pulse of the body. At this point, I would just like to open it up to the audience for questions. I have tons of things that I would love to ask Alberto, but I think we already have some questions here, so...
But you realize that I'm dangerous. Long answers.
No, I think you are a fantastic storyteller, and thank you for what you've given us this morning. I think we'll just wait for the microphone to come to you. And you can only ask questions in Spanish, so... Yes.
Thank you. I want to apologize for not having heard a word of your writings except what I've heard here today, but you did stir up a very interesting question in me about structural versus anti-structural writing, and you must be a genius if your books are doing so well and you write in a way that the order of the chapters don't matter. Because what I wonder about is you talk about desire and that the words don't come alive unless that fire is in the reader, the desire is in the reader. And yet, from what I know from writing and psychology, is that the psychological underpinnings for classic story structure are such a key desire in readers. I personally, though an English major and a writer, have never been able to make it all the way through an anti-structural novel, ever, though I've read thousands of novels. How do you justify frustrating that? I know it's something that only a genius can make an anti-structural film or a novel work. How do you justify frustrating the desire of readers for classic story structure that we find in every culture?
Well, you know, the first thing is to recognize that there is always a structure, as there is always a length of a text and intensity, and you know there are elements that they are there. There is no natural way of writing or speaking. So, and you learn it when you are a foreigner. So I was a foreigner in the middle Mexico coming from the north, and I expended like 6 months in Mexico and 6 months in the north. So when I went to the north, I had the accent of downtown, and when I went to the town, I had the accent of the north. So there is no natural way. So there is always a structure. So you only need to pay attention to what is happening as the things you are creating. There is always, you know, in ritual music, you can see it. And there is some analysis of music that go beyond the analysis of literature. For example, I like very much the work by Alain Danielou. He is the man who invented the collection of discs in UNESCO, the music of the world. And he wrote a book on Indian music, because it's very different to other musics, or the music we have in our world. So that gives you elements to understand how that goes. About frustrating, first, you avoid the word frustration in your mentality, and also the word satisfaction. And it comes from being badly educated. I'm from a generation educated on Wilhelm Reich and the importance of orgasm. And he was talking about the boycott of orgasm. It comes from there. And the typical structure of a novel is based on the same scheme of orgasm. And you know, there are so many things to learn from the tantric experiences, the tantric music. So you don't frustrate it. You make a composition of the intensities. So it's never like cutting something, or it's to getting into another possibility of being. And the possibilities of literature are huge, are immense. So why to restrain us to what we know? But first, we need to take out of our mind the idea of satisfaction or frustration. Because, you know, if you had a good sexual experience even, you want more. You're never satisfied. If you had a good experience reading a book, you want to read it again, and it's different. And that happens with the poetic dimension of literature. When do you abandon a poem, a good poem? When do you abandon it? It goes with you all the time. It travels with you in life. And it changes each time you read it. So that is what happened. And structures things, I do believe, not to construct, but to understand what is being constructed. That's the difference. You don't follow the rules of the structure. You follow the thing that is alive, and then the structural analysis helps you to understand what is happening, and maybe to correct a little bit. That's the craft. But the craft doesn't make a technological advance doesn't make an aesthetical advance. It's the opposite. I don't know if I answered your...
Yes, that was wonderful. That was wonderful.
Sorry for the long answers.
That was a great long answer. Well, yes, it is. Okay. So if I understand you, oh, good. You're saying that when you're writing, you're following like the flow of the energy, and that's creating structure because energy always will do that, but it isn't coming from your head. It's more coming from your body and your heart.
Absolutely.
Is that accurate?
Absolutely, yes, you're right.
Thank you.
I can give you mine.
I have one here. Okay. Okay. Can you speak about the line, either real or imagined, between prose and poetry?
Between...
Prose and poetry?
Yes, I like very much the answer that Pier Paolo Pasolini, one of the writers I admire the most, not only the movie maker, but the writer, he said, prose is the poetry that it's not. So it's another kind of poetry. I think that everything we write is poetry. Everything we write is poetry. But we pervert it for the market, selling it as a novel. For example, this book, the one you had there, this is published as a non-fiction work here in the United States. The same text is published in Spain as a poem. The same text, without changing anything, is published in France as a novel, a roman. Fortunately, in Mexico, it's just published. They didn't need it to put a... But sometimes they classify it as a novel. So, but you know, poetry is on the base of everything. I do think so. You only need to be conscious that that happens. I like very much to, when I was worried about generic definitions, I began to learn that in other cultures, that doesn't exist as we have it. For example, in Arabic, there is the adab, which means a form that allows you to tell something with an experience of astonishment, with reflection and telling a story. And that's one of the exercises I did with the Norope students. I finally, after all the sessions, the exercise was to ask them to answer the question, why I write. And in their answer, I asked them to tell a very personal experience, an invented one, coming from the lived experience, an astonishment, a wonder, a sense of wonder, an experience of wonder, and reflection, an idea. All of it together. And they were worried about in what genre they are writing. I said, no, in Spanish we say, flojito y cooperando, easygoing. So, literature is open to possibilities. But at the beginning is poetry. You know, for what Anne was talking yesterday about documentary poetry. Well, that is to emphasize also the charge of reality that has to be. In Protestant, we are badly educated on these Protestant terms. So they think that, well, they invented this obnoxious term of non-fiction. What is that? What does that mean? Madame Bovary tells you much more about France in the 19th century than some history books made in that time about the same subject. So the truth about it, the documentary work that Flaubert did, was amazing. So for this, the whole series of 5 books, I interviewed 600 women about their desires. More than 100 about their desires while pregnant.
Why didn't we talk about that? Why didn't we talk?
Sorry?
We should have spoken about that.
We are speaking. So, but you know, I said, what do you do? It's a documentary work, but you tell it in a poetic way. So in the middle of the cycle, there is a book called The Secret Gardens of Mogador. There is a happy couple. This couple, they just met. Their sexual life is fabulous. But something happens. Her father dies, and she's pregnant. And when a woman's pregnant, the geography of her desires in her body, the topography of desires, changes every day. Even the water tastes different from a woman, according to my research. So imagine the rest. So I found that many women abandon sex while they are pregnant. Many women, not many, less women, intensify it with their couple when they are pregnant. Really, very, very few. But most of them, in all the fields, have desires, imaginary or factual, with another person that is not the husband. Because normally the husband flies away. He's afraid of what is happening in the body of the woman. So I based the book on the really, really tiny group of more than 100 women. There was only 3 that decided to educate the men. And this woman tells to his lover a Shahrazad formula. We will not make love again unless you come every night to tell me a secret garden of Mogador. Mogador is the city where they live, but there is only one garden, her father's garden. So he tells, but what garden? No. Garden in the sense of a space, a place that is transformed by desires in a way that people made of this space, that could be the space between 2 people, a paradise. So you need to tell me how people build paradises. Every night you go to the world and come and tell me every night a paradise. But attention, you cannot invent anything. All those paradises, all those spaces transformed by desire, have to exist. But you need to really invent the way of telling it. Because literature has a different formula for each desire. No two desires have to be told in the same way. So the book is an array of short stories, poems, and everything, ways of telling desire. But when I wrote that the woman put this requirement on the man, I said, shit, as a writer, as an author, I have to obey that. So I expended another 6 years making a research on places transformed, real places, real transformations, and looking for the way of telling it. So the book is like a rainbow of ways of telling desires, and a research on real desires. So it's documentary, but you don't have to tell it in a sociological way. We need to remember this about poetic prose, this answer that Milan Kundera gave to when they asked the question, what does novel exist still now? And I will say it, why does poetry exist now? Poetry is not a way of making beauty things. It's not a decorative item. Poetry is a way of exploring dimensions of humanity, dimensions of us that no other speech can reach. No economics, no psychology, no psychoanalysis. That's why poetry exists, because it touches down, it goes there, and allows us to have a knowledge of what we are.
Thank you.
For a second.
I think, Alberto, that is... unfortunately, we are out of time, but we can have one last question, and I think you're the lucky person who gets to ask it.
Is this on? Thank you so much. I didn't know what to expect, and even though the Spanish was there, I agree with you. Hearing the Spanish and the lilt and the diction together with English makes a big difference. Hearing your long expositions, and I appreciate them, I'm curious to know, given what you just talked about, the intersection of reality and fantasy and expressing them, what inspires you? What drives you as an author to pick these subjects? Obviously, they're fascinating, the way you're talking about them, but what motivates you? How do you pick them?
Well, it's hard to have only one definition, but when you are a writer, you live like excited about everything that is happening around, and the question is almost the question why you write, no? And I write to make furious the powers, but also I write to be loved, to be desired. I write to dance. I write to be quiet. I write to get naked. I write to get disguised. I write to travel. I write to close my eyes and not to travel. And, well, there is so many answers to that question. Because while we are alive, we are unpredictable.
I just want to thank you, Alberto, for being such a great storyteller, for your wisdom, your poetic vision, and your humor. Thank you so much. Please give Alberto a big hand.